Thank you for joining us today. My name is Brad Miller, and this is the Chronically Human podcast, where we have discussions aimed at creating a better world with more individual freedom and less unnecessary suffering. Today, I'm joined by Darryl Bosshardt of Redmond Inc. Redmond Inc. has many different business ventures, but we focus on their real salt products. Their real salt is mined from an ancient seabed in Redmond, Utah, which contains 60 plus trace minerals and has been protected from man-made pollution. We also discuss the principles and philosophy behind Redmond Inc. and what they mean when they say they're all about elevating the human experience for their employees, their customers, and also their community at large. Darryl is very knowledgeable about salt, and we talk about the history of salt, why it's important in the human diet, and why individuals who are on the vegan, vegetarian, paleo, keto, or carnivore diet can benefit from using a high-quality ancient sea salt. Thank you for listening today, and I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. Thank you, Darryl, for being on the show today.
It's great to be here. I sure appreciate having you having me on today.
Yeah, definitely, man. I found you guys by listening to Dr. Sean Baker's podcast. I believe it's called The Human Potential Outliers. And he was talking about RealSaltcom. And I thought I knew about salt, but I'd never heard about what you guys were up to. And the more I dug into the company, Redmond, the more I dug into what you guys were all about, the more I wanted to speak to you guys to get the word out, not only about your product line, which I think is fantastic, but also about the philosophy behind the business and the story about how you guys got started. Now, how did you personally get started with the company?
That's a great question. So actually, my grandpa and his brother had a farm back in the 1950s. And in World War II, my grandpa was actually a riveter and worked as a business manager for McDonnell Douglas in California. And his brother was a miner up at Kennecott, which is the large copper mine here in Utah. So after the war ended, they came back to rural Utah, which is where they were raised, and wanted to give a go at Grandpa's farm. And so they started farming there. And the farm wasn't doing too well. There was a drought here in Utah in the 1950s, late 1950s. And there was an outcropping of salt north and south of their farm that the Native Americans had harvested long before the pioneers, came into the southern Utah area or central Utah area. And so they knew there was salt under their farm. And because the farm wasn't doing that well, and because there was salt north and south of their farm, they thought, let's drill down and see if we have salt under us. And so they took a piece of rebar and pounded it down through the field to see where the salt came closest to the surface. And so they bought a bulldozer and bulldozed the alfalfa and the barley and the corn out of the way. And lo and behold, about 30 feet from the surface was this ancient sea salt that was laid down and trapped under their farm eons ago. And so they started selling salt to local farmers. And that's kind of how it got started. And originally, it's fun that you heard about us through the food salt side. Originally, the salt was sold mostly for agricultural use, for local farmers. All animals need salt to survive. And so they took these salt chunks from this ancient seabed, and the salt has a kind of a rose quartz color. It's kind of a red color because there were other minerals that were trapped in with this ancient seabed, which really give it a sweeter flavor. And so the farmers immediately fell in love with it because the cows and the horses fell in love with it. And so my family would use it as food salt, but it wasn't the primary focus. And then in the 1970s, a nutritionist from New York came through, I think, visiting the Grand Canyon, and stopped in to see us on the way through. We didn't think anything of it, but a few months later, we started getting phone calls from back east with people saying, hey, we would like to buy your salt. And we said, great. Is this for your cows, or is this for your roads to keep the roads safe because it melts snow off the roads? And they said, no, this is actually the food salt. And we said, well, we don't currently sell it for that reason. And they said, oh, well, there was this article that was written by this nutritionist that says the salt here in Utah from this ancient seabed is the healthiest, tastiest salt he's ever found, and we want to buy it. And so we thought, we better put it in a shaker and sell it for food. And we sat around and said, what do we call this? It's not processed salt. It's not, sea salt from a current ocean. It's not half salt or near salt or new salt, or it's just real salt, the way nature created it. And the name stuck. And so, now I have a pouch here. That's kind of the brand. It's stuck. The design has changed, since the 1970s, 1980s, but it's just real salt. And so we leave it the way nature intended. We don't take anything out. We don't put anything back into it. So because of that, a lot of chefs love it. A lot of nutritionists love it, because instead of having a lot of your salts today, if you look at the ingredient panel, we'll have things like yellow prussiated soda and sodium silicon dioxide, all of these ingredients and additives that we just don't feel like you need. So we leave all of that out and leave the salt the way nature created it, which gives it a sweeter flavor with some other minerals that offset the sodium. And so that's the kind of the Reader's Digest version of at least the product that you are aware of, which is Real Salt. And now you can find Real Salt at most of your health food stores across the country. You can find it in some grocery stores. That's getting more and more in grocery. Of course, online, Amazon, places like that. So anyway, that was a long introduction, but that's kind of the start of at least the product that you were introduced to, which was Real Salt.
Well, that's fantastic. That's why that's one of the reasons why I started this podcast, was to meet the people behind the products, and to meet and to understand the philosophy behind why people are doing what they're doing. And I think that there's a huge movement right now for eat local. So I think it's important that people also know not only where their food comes from, but also who is mining their salt. Because when I was growing up, we had table salt and kosher salt. That was about it. And then we got into sea salt, and then Himalayan salt has really been, I think, the biggest introduction of salt in the American diet as far as something new. What is the difference between what you guys are doing and what Himalayan salt, which I think it should be more accurately named Pakistani salt, because the major mine is owned by the Pakistani government. I didn't know that until recently. And the people over there are mining by hand and in some actually really horrible conditions I wasn't aware of.
Yeah, so you touched on a couple of really important points that are confusing to many consumers. And the first is that even the term sea salt, if I go and give a presentation to a group of nutritionists and I ask, by raise of hands, who has heard sea salt is better? And almost everybody is going to raise their hand. Right. When in fact, if we started looking at labels on salt, I can show you that there are, sea salts that are more toxic and have more additives than maybe the table salt that you grew up in the canister growing up. And that's because all salt can be defined as sea salt because it comes from a seabed at some point. And so it might come from the San Francisco Bay, which unfortunately is not the cleanest body of salt water. It could come from the Gulf of Mexico, which again, with things like BP and Exxon Valdez, our oceans, unfortunately, are not what they used to be. And now we have the addition of things like microbeads and plastics and pharmaceuticals that people are dumping into the water supplies. And so sea salt, whether it comes from a current ocean like the San Francisco Bay, it could come from a dead sea like the Dead Sea in Israel or the Great Salt Lake here in Utah, or it can come from an ancient seabed like the seabed that's trapped here in Utah, or the ancient seabed that comes out of the Himalaya, Pakistan region. So first thing I would tell people, if you're looking for a healthy salt, just forget looking for sea salt, because it may or may not be a clean product. And so the better thing to do is to look at the back of the ingredient panel and ask yourself 3 questions. And these are the same 3 questions I would ask if you're, buying some kale or some peas at the farmer's market, or some eggs, or you're buying salt. And the first one is know the source, know where it's coming from. Is it coming from a current ocean? Is it coming from the Dead Sea? Is it coming from, the coast of Japan, which unfortunately, again, has some challenges? Who is producing it is another really good question, because with salt particularly, almost all salt goes through a series of transactions where you buy a shaker of salt and you have no idea where that salt came from. Mm-hmm. Did it come from an ocean? Did it come from the States? Did it come from the Mediterranean? Did it come from the South Pacific? And so knowing who's producing it is really important. Because then it's possible to find out the third question, which is, what are they doing to it? Are you taking anything out? Are you putting anything back in? How are you processing it? And whether you're buying local eggs or, salt, I think those are really important questions, because if you know the source, you know where it's coming from, you know who's handling it or what they're doing to it, and if they're taking something out or putting something in, you will end up with a really good product. And with salt, that's particularly difficult because of the number of hands it changes through. Now, you mentioned Himalayan, and I think generally speaking, that's a fairly good brand at 50,000 foot level, because it's coming from an ancient seabed. An ancient seabed was laid down during the Jurassic era, which geologists would put in the 150 to 250 million year ago category. Now, I wasn't alive back then to confirm the actual date,
right,
but it was a long time ago, certainly long before we had acid rain, nuclear waste, before we had microbeads and plastics and some of the things in our current oceans. And then the second thing you mentioned is, there's dozens, and I don't know the exact number, but there's many mines in Pakistan that produce the Himalayan salt and dump it out to the coast. When it comes over it, if it ends up in a big box store or your local grocery retailer under a brand of pink salt, it's virtually impossible to know where that salt came from. Was it from this deposit or this mine? And I've interacted with many of the Himalayan salt producers, and some of them say, the different mines do it differently, which again makes total sense.
Sure.
But traceability does become a bit of a factor, which is, again, one of the reasons people prefer real salt, because it's from the same deposit, from the same place every time, from this seabed in Utah. Now, the other factor that I personally think is important is food miles. If I can find a local producer of any food that I'm going to eat, and it's down the street from me, or even across town or across the state, or even within the same country, there's a lot less food miles that are going into that. Now, I'm all for economic development in all parts of the world, but I think if you can source local, not only do you have the traceability, but then you also have fewer food miles as far as transportation costs and stuff. So if I lived in Pakistan, I think there's no reason to import our product all the way over into Pakistan, because they have a really good product there, as long as you ask those three questions. What's the producer doing? Are they using explosives to extract it? Are they contaminating it anyway? Are they using fair labor practices? If you ask those questions and you're local, boy, there's probably some really good salt there. And in fact, another favorite salt I have is from Bolivia. Bolivia has a great natural pink salt from an ancient seabed. So if any of your listeners ever make it down to Bolivia, stop in and get some great local salt there. They do it right. They harvest it pretty much the same as we do. And it's a great product. And so I'm not, obviously I'm biased. I think real salt's amazing, and I think it's the best salt that everybody should have.
Right.
And if you taste real salt side by side with Himalayan, they're going to be fairly close. Now, there are some slight differences, not in the mineral content, but in the ratios of those minerals. And so it can change the flavor. Some notice there's a little bit sharper flavor with the Himalayan, and the real salt side by side usually is a little sweeter, but it's generally fairly similar. And there's also some good quality salts that come from around the world, from the Mediterranean, from Hawaii, and they all have some uniqueness. There's a Bali salt that is a beautiful salt. Sometimes it's called Bali salt or Cyprus salt. It's a fun little pyramid snowflake that's great on chocolates. But for your everyday natural salt, I think real salt's hard to beat.
Yeah, definitely, and I agree with that. I apologize for that. That I was getting a phone call. I'm sorry.
No worries.
About the local salt deal, and I like how that you didn't run down what other people are doing. You just ask you just have those three questions to ask, and let the consumer be the one who decides who they want to give their dollars to. And that's one thing with Chronically Human Podcast. We are definitely laissez-faire capitalists. We believe in the free market. We believe in peaceful trading around the world. But at the same time, if you can get that product, why import something that you already have within your borders that you can benefit from?
Yeah, and I think we're on the same page there. And Redmond, we haven't talked a lot about Redmond, but our philosophy, going back to the foundation of Redmond, my grandpa and his brother, they built the business originally on this idea of and as cliche as it sounds, with treating people and customers and vendors the way they wanted to be treated. Right. And so that's how we really kind of got started. We've refined that a bit, and now we say that Redmonds is about elevating the human experience. And so we try to do that with our employees. If you've been to our website, you'll see a lot of the activities that we do. Redmond is under the belief that you spend more time, most people spend more time with their associates and at the office or at the mine than they do with their families. Right. If you're getting up, I get up in the morning, spend an hour or two with my kids as we're getting ready for the day. They go to school, I come to work. After school, they've got their activities, lacrosse and track and piano and swimming and the stuff that they do. And so by the time we get back together as a family, we've got a couple of hours for dinner, maybe a family game night, and then we're off to bed. And so the actual, face-to-face interactions with my coworkers is much greater than my family even. And so we believe that work should be a place that can be your charity. The work can be a place for your gift to society, and that's not to downplay the family at all, just the reality of it. And so we try to create an environment that is focused around the idea of elevating the human experience. And so people will come to us and say, Redmond is a great place to work. I hear all these stories. It must be family focused. And we try to be principle focused, right? Because I think if you're family focused, then you sometimes will let work suffer because of the family. And then versus a more holistic approach, one of the ideas we talk about at Redmond is trying to have life be a blend versus life being a balance. If you try to balance your time and you want to spend equal amounts of time at work and at home and maybe in community, life doesn't work that way, because you might have a week that comes up, being chronically, I just love the name chronically human. A week comes up and maybe there's a family emergency. And so for a whole week, you need to really spend focused on your family, and then work would in theory suffer. But if you try to live your life in a blend versus a balance, then it's easier to have that give and take, where there's some nights that you might stay and work extremely late because of some work responsibilities, and other times you might leave at 2:00 every day during the state athletic finals so you can be with your family during that. And so we really try to have this more holistic approach, both to work as well as to our associates, and because it just allows for that blend versus a trying to have everything balanced. Because even with your kids, it's hard to spend. I don't know if you have kids or no kids.
I'm not married. I don't have kids.
Well, if I've got 3 boys, and if I were to try to spend equal amounts of time, like 30 minutes with this one, 30 minutes with this one, 30 minutes with this one, consistently, even though that might be quote unquote balanced, it wouldn't be fair, and it wouldn't really make sense, because there are some times where my oldest son is going to need a lot more than 30 minutes, and my youngest might need a lot less. And I think work's the same way, and our life's the same way. So rather than saying we're a family-focused company or we're something else focused, we try to say we focus on the blend and focus on elevating the human experience.
That's a great point about being principle-focused, because if you don't have that principle, then life can come at you very fast, and all of a sudden you're drifting away from your principles for expediency. And I think that having a regimented life, there's certain things where discipline is good, but at the same time you have to be flexible. And it's funny you talk about the blend of life and treating each situation independently, that it's based upon principles, but things do change and you can't predict really the future. And it's only acting from principle can you really have a guide for when things come up that you don't expect. And I think that applies actually to the food industry as well, because we're getting into a more centralized, regimented society where we're getting a lot of top-down information about what we should be doing with our lives. And those one-size-fits-all solutions, they definitely haven't worked for me in my life. And I think a lot of people are drawn to companies like yourself, like what you guys are doing, because it's more focused on individuals. It's more focused on individuals taking responsibility for their health and wellness, and also responsibility for how you treat others in the workplace and at home.
Yeah, that really resonates well. Another thing that we talk about is putting yourself in the place of most potential. Now, these aren't our ideas. These are ideas we've picked up from great books and other speakers over the years. DeWitt Jones is a big we just love a lot of the work that DeWitt Jones. He was a National Geographic photographer and has a series of videos and talking about a lot of these principles. But the idea of putting yourself in the place of most potential I think fits really well with the idea of chronically human. Because when you get up in the morning, deciding where is my place of most potential, it might be with your family, it might be at work, it might be in the community, it might be, volunteering with another organization. And so again, we try to have our associates and ourselves and our products even designed around that idea of putting ourselves in the place of most potential. And that makes it a little easier to decide, should I take off work early today? Well, where can I add the most value in life? And that might be staying at the office for an extra hour, or it might be going home, or it might be, going and volunteering at the local community organization that you're passionate about. So.
Now, are you guys still family owned? Is your grandfather still involved?
Yeah, great question. So yes, we are still family owned. As the company grew, my family realized early on that it takes a different personality to grow a business to level X as it does to level Y. And so in the late 90s, early 2000s, we were starting to feel like the company wasn't growing and being able to, again, it kind of sounds silly, but bless as many lives as possible through growth. And so we were still growing, but not at the rate that we were previous to that. And so we sat down as a family and thought, what can we do to, again, the place of most potential and have the biggest impact? And we felt that selling the company to one of our employees at the time, who just has a lot of our same values and same ideas, would allow that growth to take another exponential turn upwards. And so in late 90s, early 2000s, we sold, my family, dad and his brothers and cousins, sold the company to our current CEO. His name's Red Roberts. And he grew up in the same area, has the same passion, same values, and it really allowed the company to experience a lot more growth. Sometimes, as I said before, it takes a different personality to grow a business to, say, 100 employees to 300 employees or more. And so at that point, kind of passing that torch on to another family in the community made a lot of sense. And so the other really beautiful thing about that is, and maybe your brother can attest to this, is a family business. Sometimes you feel compelled or obligated to do things that, because you're the business owner, you feel you have to do, that maybe isn't a great fit for you personally. And so there were some roles like that over the years. Some people in the family were doing parts of the business when they really, a good example is my uncle, actually a cousin, and he loves driving loaders and he loves loading trucks. And as a business owner, sometimes you feel like you shouldn't be doing that. You should be doing more management stuff. And so with the sale of the company, he said, you know what, I really want to just load, play in the loader and load trucks and run the mill. And my dad is another example. My dad loves customer service. He just loves working with customers, talking to customers. He can be on the phone for 3 hours. It doesn't bother him at all. But as a business owner, sometimes he felt like he had to be more involved in the office management and HR stuff, which really would make him miserable. He did a fine job, but it didn't fill his cup like customer service does. And so in that sale, he was able to say, look, I have done some of the office management stuff and HR stuff, but I just love to spend time with the customers on the phone. And so with that transition, it made it lots easier for those in the family that were still wanting to be involved to kind of scale back and do just the parts that they loved, which again allowed the business to excel. Something that we have found, if we have two projects and one is an A project and another one's, let's say, is a C project, and then you have two people, and I would much rather have somebody that's got an A level of passion working on a C level project than somebody working with a C level passion on an A level project. And so as we have grown, there's a book, Good to Great. And in the book, Good to Great, the idea is, what are these companies that have been good, and then they were able to become great. An amazing book. And one of the principles of that is the author talks about having a bus. And the first decision is, hey, we've got a bus. We need to make sure that everybody's on the right bus. And if the bus is going, to Florida, and there's a few people that want to go to Hawaii, we need to get them off the bus as fast as possible. They might be great people. Mm-hmm. They might be, amazing friends. But if the bus is going, to Hawaii, we need to get those off that don't want to be there. And then once you get everybody on the bus, then you need to make sure everybody's in the right seat. And that's another beautiful thing about Redmond now is we've grown. We started out as a basic salt company, but now we've grown and we have a natural food store where we do raw milk, and we have natural, beef. We have a fence and outdoor living space company. And so as the companies have grown, it really allows people to change seats on the bus a little bit easier. And so rather than, having somebody who maybe is in the wrong seat, instead of having them have to leave the bus, we can find them a new seat. And that might be moving from the agricultural team, which focuses on products for natural dairies and farmers and equine, in the equine industry. Maybe it's moving there to our food salt division, or maybe from the food salt division to our natural food stores. We've got 4 health food stores here in Utah that we do kind of a boutique natural food store. Where we do house-made kombucha, and we carry our products there as well, the salt and the clay and the toothpaste products that we have, but also other great clean natural products. So it's just been fun to see the company change over the years. We still have that same small company feel and the same small company values, but as the company has grown and has different business units, it's really allowed people to play to their strengths and work in a division and within a role that allows them to really excel. And so if your listeners want to learn more about Redmond, if you go to Redmond Inc., redmondinc.com, there's some fun videos that talk a little bit about our history and our story. I think my dad is on one of them, so it's kind of fun to see him. I think there's just a lot of fun videos, shows some of our leadership retreats that we take for associates and their spouses to come each year. And then also a little bit about the different business units. And so they can kind of see some of the different products that we have. And we can talk more if you have questions about products, but I like to talk about the culture and the company experience. And then
sure, definitely.
The products allow us to do that.
Exactly. And I think there was one video that I saw, I'm not sure if it was your father or not, talking about the idea that profits are not a bad word. They're a means to an end. And I think that a lot of times people demonize businesses or business owners for making a profit. But at the same time, profit is what allows you that margin. That's what allows you to really treat human beings like human beings. And one of the employees in that video, it really struck me. He said that, we're treated as individuals who have a lot to share, and we feel like we're a part of something bigger than ourselves. And I think that's what everybody is so desperately trying to find in this world.
Yeah, and that video particularly, I think, is done really well. And it's not, it's kind of funny over the years, we'll have, partners or, vendors, customers will come out and join us for one of our leadership events. And at our leadership events, it's a lot different. A lot of companies, the leadership events include everybody from a certain level, up, in the organization, where if you join us with one of our leadership events, everybody's there, from, somebody on the warehouse floor to the CEO, and you walk into our offices and it's a very open office feel. In fact, I'm in a conference room right now, but if you walked into our offices, you wouldn't be able to see, you wouldn't know who's the CEO, who's the CFO, who's customer service, because everybody is on an open floor. It looks like a bit of a boiler room sometimes, but there's not this. Obviously we have team leaders and we have, business unit leaders, but it doesn't feel as hierarchical that you might find in some organizations.
That's
and
great.
We really go out of our way to kind of make it, there's a book called it's on, I can't think of the name of the book. Margaret, I can't even think of it's on chaos theory, chaos theory in business. And it's this really neat idea that, if you look at a beehive, I used to keep bees. I've got out of beekeeping, but I used to keep bees. And they're really fun creatures to watch because there's a queen bee, but the queen bee's not bossing people around. The queen's job is just to lay eggs, actually, to sustain the hive. Right. And then the bees themselves assign themselves different roles. And so as a bee is young, it will transport food to the larva. And as it gets older, then it will start to guard the front door. And as it gets older, then it starts to guard the outside of the hive. And then it starts to be a gatherer of bees. And then it probably gets hit by a Mack truck at some point. But bees, when you open up the hive, it looks like utter chaos. There's just bees all over. But they're all, if you told the bees that what they were doing was chaotic, they would probably be offended. And it's a lot more fluid. And so that's why, again, titles at Redmond are a little bit harder to lock down, because if you're really playing to your strengths and putting yourself in the place of most potential, that role is going to be somewhat fluid. And generally, if a team at Redmond hires a new team member, rather than having this person come in with a set list of you will do X, Y, Z that's your particular role, oftentimes the team will sit down together. They'll put up all of the roles that the team's responsible for on the board, and then say, okay, what things do you like to do? What things do you not like to do? And let's shuffle the deck. Because oftentimes there might be a job that somebody utterly hates. They think this is the worst job ever. Maybe talking on the phone. Maybe somebody just thinks there's nothing worse than being stuck on the phone for 3 hours explaining to a farmer how to use Redmond products to get the most out of their natural dairy. That might be terrible for somebody. But yet my dad loves that, and he would do that every day. But if you ask him to do something else that somebody else might really love, to him that's draining. And so one of the things we really try to do is be really open, be really vulnerable, and share the things that fill your cup. Now that doesn't mean to say that there's not parts of everybody's job that is no fun. Right. We all have those things. But if we can play to our strengths most of the time, that gives us the courage, it gives us the energy to then do those other things that maybe are less fun. And so, Redmond is not overly utopian. We don't have this idea that, there won't be anything that ever, goes wrong, because it's still a place to work. Sure. In fact, the CEO, his name's Rhett Roberts, that's who we sold the company 2 years ago. He feels he's involved in the interview process, and he feels that his role at Redmond, one of his important roles, is to talk people out of coming.
Oh, wow. I like that.
And because, here locally, Redmond is known as a very nice place to work, a very, community player. He's involved in a lot of community events. And so it's quite visible. And then if you happen to live next to a Redmond associate, oftentimes they won't shut up about how cool it is to work at Redmond. And so because of that, we have a lot of people, we don't have a real hard time finding applicants when we're looking to fill a position. But because of the way it might look from the outside, somebody coming in might have this idea that, hey, Redmond is this, place where I can just, show up. I don't have to. So there's sometimes unrealistic
discipline. Yeah, discipline and responsibility.
Right, and sometimes people will look at Redmond and say, well, results must not matter. I mean, you guys take people on trips, and employees can come and go, and my neighbor is always, they say always. In reality, it's not always. But their neighbor might, be able to attend more events with their kids than maybe they're able to. And so from the outside looking in, it looks like it's like results don't matter. And we'll be involved in some other like CEO type groups, and people will say, this is unrealistic. You're in manufacturing. Manufacturing doesn't have the margins that, software technology companies do. And so it's really intentional how we invest in these activities. and in the human experience, because we actually feel it does give us a good return if we do that. And so, like you said, it's not that results don't matter. In fact, because of that, results matter even more.
Right.
Because if we didn't have accountability, didn't have responsibility, and didn't have some clear expectations of putting yourself in the place of most potential, and giving your strengths most of the time, and really contributing and really making a difference, well, then the model starts to fall apart, because we wouldn't have the returns, we wouldn't have the profitability that would allow us then to continue to invest in elevating the human experience, which really is what we try to do. It's not just a tagline on the website. And I think as people come, they really are impressed that wow, Redmond is as genuine as the videos make it look like we are. And I really don't think that the videos are overselling. They're not cut and spliced to paint a rosier picture than is here. It's just that we really value that belief in elevating the human experience. And at the end of the day, we try to bring all the decisions back to that. We are a company, we make mistakes.
Sure.
We fall short of that ideal, but that's really what we strive or focus to maintain.
And I think that's important to have that as the core, because it seems like when businesses grow, no matter how hard they try to get away from that core impetus of growth, that they become a magnification of what they started as, and that it's important to clearly define what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable, the way that you conduct not only your personal life, but definitely your business life. And I think that does reflect, as you grow, it kind of ripples out almost in a fractal nature, that, those principles, if a ship starts veering off course, it's almost impossible to turn it back if it's not based upon, the principles that you first started with.
We love the ship analogy. Stephen Covey, in his 7 Habits, and in his follow-up books, Third Alternative, but he talks about how difficult that ship is to move. But to move that ship off course, as a percentage of the mass, it's that trim tab, that little teeny, it's not even the rudder. It's this little teeny trim tab that's off the tip of the rudder that changes, which then throws the rudder, which then moves the ship. And so by focusing on those little principles, or seemingly small things that are under the iceberg, that really allows us to impact in a much bigger way those larger principles. And so as we spend time with associates doing trainings and doing leadership events, we really try to focus on not the visible part of the iceberg or the visible part of the culture we're trying to change, because if you try to change the iceberg by whacking at the top of it, you might feel like you're really busy, but you're not going to have much of a change. And that ship analogy is very true. And so I think one of the things that Redmond will need to do as we continue to grow is maintain the focus on the trim tab. Because trying to do big initiatives or trying to move that ship in a large way all at once, if it drifts too far off course, becomes much more difficult as the organization gets larger, unless you focus on the trim tab, those little teeny principles, respectively, small principles, in putting people in their place of most potential, and helping people be vulnerable and do the harder work, so they know what is their biggest contribution. And if that biggest contribution they discover is outside of Redmond, boy, we're happy to help them make that transition. Or if their biggest contribution is within Redmond, then we're happy to do that too. And on a more daily basis, if that biggest contribution is spending time with their father or mother or friend, then we realize that if we're always really focused on results and putting ourselves in the place of most potential, focusing on our strengths and unique gifts, as overly utopian as that sounds, wouldn't that be an amazing place to live? Like if everybody, were really able to give their best contribution to life, rather than having a teacher who feels stuck as a teacher, or having a chemist who really wants to be a teacher, Something that, and this is an analogy I use sometimes, but Bill Gates and Mother Teresa are both very different people. And I'm sure, I don't know their whole life, and maybe my analogy falls apart. So give me some credit there. But,
Okay.
From a 10,000, 5,000, 50,000 foot level, I'm really glad that Mother Teresa impacted life like she did. And I'm equally glad that Bill Gates impacted life as he does. Because, so I had a child that was born very premature and ended up in the hospital and was hooked up to a computer. And so some people might say, well, Bill Gates, he's earned all this money, and maybe his life isn't near as meaningful as somebody as maybe a Mother Teresa who gave all of her life to the poor. And I am really glad that there was a personal computer, that technology has changed as far as it has, to allow my son to be hooked up to a computer in the hospital, because that saved his life equally as much as maybe feeding a poor orphan saved that infant's life. And so I think oftentimes we might look at Bill Gates and say, well, maybe he should have been more like Mother Teresa. Mm-hmm. Or we might look at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and say, wow, look at all this money he's donated, which I think that's wonderful. But I think in his case, his bigger contribution was probably to the computer technology that has allowed hospitals and, transportation and all of these impacts that he gave, that I am really glad he chose to focus his passion where he could add the most value, as opposed to walking away from his passion for computers and maybe spending time in the rainforest in South America. And I'm equally glad that Mother Teresa and botanists who spent their entire life studying plants in South America did that, because, maybe they didn't donate billions of dollars to a foundation, but their passion for this particular plant has impacted the world way more than if that botanist were trying to be more like Mother Teresa, or Mother Teresa was trying to run a computer company, or the computer company was trying to be a botanist. And so I think if we can all do the hard work and really discover, where is my place of most potential? What is my unique contribution? And that might not be at work. Maybe work is a means to go out and contribute music. And maybe, your music passion on the side is what gives you the energy to get through the day at work. And right. And so we're not overly utopian in our philosophy, and realize that there is, sometimes maybe you can't transition to your ideal job, or maybe it's going to take a few years to do that. But philosophically, I love that idea that, help Mother Teresa be a better Mother Teresa, help Bill Gates be a better, version of Bill Gates, and not try to cookie cutter them or to switch them.
That's exactly what we believe here at Chronically Human. We believe in individual freedom, and that each person is responsible for their own personal fulfillment and for reaching their own potential, and that the more freedom we have to explore and experiment, the more people can find that place of most purpose and that can contribute the most. And that if that means running a business, then the profit within that business, Bill Gates would have zero to give away if he didn't run profitable businesses. And we wouldn't be able to talk today because Skype is a Microsoft product. And I think that using technology to connect people is extremely important. And it's also a way that we can connect back to the earth as well, because with your products, that's basically what you guys do. It's a simple, clean product line that helps people make those little decisions on a day-to-day basis that can have huge potential to impact their lives later down the road.
Yeah, and when I haven't watched all of your episodes, but when you reached out, and first off, I loved the name. I was very intrigued with the name of the podcast. Listened to it a couple episodes, and I thought, yeah, this guy, he would be fun to talk to. So I'm really glad you'd have us on today. If you're ever out in Utah, love to meet in person, love to show you around, take you down and show you the mine. In the meantime, we do have some fun videos that your viewers or your listeners can jump online and you see a video that'll take you down underground, and you kind of see the actual ancient seabed. It's kind of like walking into the bowels of the earth, because you can go underground and lick this crystalline wall that has been buried for millennia. And this is when dinosaurs were walking the earth, and you're the first person to be right touching that, particular salt crystal from, since the Jurassic era when it was laid down. It just is kind of just a neat experience to be surrounded in this cavern of salt crystals. And in addition to the salt, like I said, Redmond has a lot of other, animal and human products, and the website does a great job, talking about that. So, again, I don't know if you have any more, questions or notes, but boy, it's been a great to be on your program. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, I definitely really enjoyed the conversation, Darryl. I just have one quick question, because I think a lot of people, when they hear about like a real salt product, they might be concerned about either lead or iodine. That they're not getting they're getting too much of one and not enough of the other. I know on your website you do address that, but for folks who are just listening who might be concerned, I believe it's Prop 65, the California deal where they label stuff like crazy, and also about table salt, which was originally had iodine added for a specific reason, about people being concerned about just using your product 100% and not using a regular table salt.
Great question. So the Prop 65 is a whole big conversation in and of itself. On the salt, there's not a Prop 65 statement on the salt. We do have a bentonite clay product, which is an ancient volcanic ash that's used for facials. It's used for body wraps. It's used for toothpaste. Really amazing product. And because that product is from the earth, it's a clay-based, it's just clay. There is a little bit of naturally occurring heavy metals in that product. But it's actually less than your typical, approved, because we live on the planet Earth and lead is the 15th most abundant element on Earth. Right. It's going to be in everything. Now, that's a lot different than a lead-based paint or leaded gasoline or, things like that. But having a little background level, there's lead levels in sunflower seeds and kale and spinach, and just because it's grown from the earth. And so because that product is just earth, the Redmond clay product and we call it earth paste, it's a natural toothpaste, will have that Prop 65 statement on it. Okay. The salt, where it's from the seabed, it doesn't have that in there. It's because it's an ancient crystallized water versus the earth, which is the volcanic ash. So the other question, though, and we talk more about that on our website. You can jump on redmondlife.com. So redmondinc.com is the parent company. Redmond.life is the food products. Okay. That's where they can see all of the food products we have, redmond.life. Gotcha. So iodine, though, iodine is really important, and for a couple of reasons. If you do a study of a cancerous prostate or cancerous breast tissue or thyroid, those will all be deficient in iodine. Iodine deficiency also is most well known for goiter that affects the thyroid. And in the Midwest during World War I, so World War I breaks out, and that's when they start the draft. When they started drafting people during World War I, if they were coming out of the Midwest, they had a higher level of goiter. And you can't be drafted, you can't serve in the military if you had goiter. And so some of the smart people got together and said, what are we going to do to solve this goiter issue? And they said, well, it's linked to an iodine deficiency. They said, okay, what ideas do we have to get rid of iodine deficiency? What can we do to encourage people to eat more iodine? And I don't know all the discussions that were had at that point. I would hope somebody would have said, hey, let's have a campaign to eat more kelp and more seafood, fish.
Or dairy.
And dairy, raw, kelp and all of these, mozzarella cheese. Those are all good sources of iodine. Somebody along the way said, hey, let's add iodine to flour. Everybody eats flour, and so if we're enriching it already, so if we're enriching the flour, if we put iodine with the flour, that would kind of compel or force people to eat more iodine. And that they tried that, and it didn't work as well as they were hoping. I don't know if it was because of the stability or just what. They could have chose to try to add it to water. A lot of cities will add fluoride to water. That's a whole different discussion. But there is, but that's why they added it, to encourage consumption. And so somebody said, hey, let's add iodine to salt. You have to eat salt to live. If we add iodine to salt, then it would force people to eat more iodine, and we could solve the goiter problem. So that was the regulation. And at that point, they said, okay, we're going to force you to add iodine to salt, to the salt manufacturers. And if you don't add it to your salt product, you have to say, this salt does not supply iodide, a necessary nutrient. even if your salt contains natural levels of iodine, if you don't add it, you have to say this salt does not contain iodine, necessary nutrient. So real salt, if you pull up the elemental analysis, and actually on the back of the product, we used to list the iodine levels, but we had to take that off because of labeling regulation. And even though, so if we look back here, you probably won't be able to see that here, but this right on the front, it says this salt does not supply iodine, necessary nutrient, even though we know it has it in it. And that's just because of the labeling laws. So real salt does contain natural levels of iodine, but it's only about 10%. So if you have a quarter teaspoon of iodized salt, that will have generally, don't quote me on this, but about 45 to 50% of your RDA of iodine in that quarter teaspoon, versus ours is about 10%. So it's quite a bit less, but it's naturally occurring. Now, Dr. David Brownstein wrote a book called his book was called Salt Your Way to Health. Dr. David Brownstein, excellent book. And then he wrote a follow-up to that called Iodine, Why You Need It, Why You Can't Live Without It. And excellent book. And that's where most of this information I'm telling you comes from. And in this study, they did a analysis, and they said, okay, we're going to see how bioavailable iodine in salt is. And what they found was it was less than 10%. So once you consume, say, this much iodine in iodized salt, your body is only using less than 10% of the iodine that's there, because it's just not, it's bound as such, so the body can't absorb it.
It's not bioavailable?
It's not bioavailable, yeah. And so the point for this whole conversation is everybody, probably every listener, or a very high percentage of your listeners, are going to be iodine deficient. A few reasons for that. One, iodine is a halogen. The other halogens are bromine, chlorine, fluoride, and iodine. And so the thyroid loves halogens, and a larger halogen will get pushed out of the way by a smaller halogen. The reason that works, let's say I had a big bucket of steel marbles, and some are little teeny and some are really big, and I put a magnet in there and I swirl it around and I pull the magnet out. When I do that, the little marbles are going to push the big marbles out of the way because they're going to squeeze in and fill in those spots. And so as you have those other halogen exposure, bromine, chlorine, fluoride, those can block iodine reception. So that's a problem. Right. And so in Dr. Brownstein's book, he says, first thing is try to avoid these other halogens. Try to, chlorine, get a water filter so you're not getting all the city chlorine. You can get a shower filter to help block some of that chlorine absorption. Fluoride, reverse osmosis will remove that from your water supply if you're on a well or on a state that doesn't, put fluoride. New car smell is bromide. It's a fire retardant. And so try to reduce your exposure to those. Dr. Brownstein suggests helps iodine absorption. Then the other thing is go out of your way to find foods rich in iodine. We talked about a lot of those. But even with those two things, there's probably many people that still just can't get enough iodine. Our soils are depleted. We don't have the nutrient value in our wheat or our lettuce or whatever. Generally isn't as nutrient dense as it was years ago before we started industrialized, repetitive farming in the same area. And so there are some good iodine supplements. And so if somebody's concerned about their iodine levels, salt is not a good way to supplement your iodine.
Right.
Back to World War I, it did actually solve the issue. And if you're eating enough copious amounts of salt with iodine, it can help. In my opinion, nature has it right. And I would much rather, instead of taking a vitamin C tablet, I would much rather eat a bunch of citrus. If I'm, now that's not to say I have no problems. If I was iron deficient, I would have no problems going to the doctor and either getting an IV or getting even a pill that would help me not die from natremia, from iodine deficiency. But at the same time, long term, if I can go out of my way to eat more foods that are rich in iodine, or rich in vitamin A, or rich in vitamin C, I would prefer to go that route if possible, but I'm not opposed to medicine either. I've got a brother who's an MD, and I have no problems with medicine. But I think our food can also be our medicine generally for a lot of us. And maybe some people, maybe they don't have the ability to metabolize certain enzymes or certain vitamins, and so they need to use supplements and pharmaceuticals, which I again don't have a problem with. But to the iodine point, there are natural foods and natural salts that have iodine in it. A quarter teaspoon is not going to be enough to fulfill your recommended daily allowance, but it was never meant to be. Salt was never meant to be a source of iodine. There's some in there, but there are better foods that are better sources of iodine. So focusing on those while using a natural salt that has some small amounts of natural iodine is, in my opinion, a much healthier approach.
Well, that's great information, because a lot of times I don't think we even consider what's in our food or consider the ingredients or where it comes from until we have a problem. And so, like, I'm glad that you talked about not having a problem with these other solutions that can help. But at the same time, if we can prevent some of these issues and from needing these artificial solutions or these solutions that are expensive and could be prevented from even being needed, I think that's definitely a great point. And I think with your other product line as well, with the toothpaste and the facial cleanser and the other personal products, because people have no idea what's actually in their toothpaste that they're using on a daily basis, or what they wash their face with, because there's a lot of chemicals and a lot of stuff in those products we use every day that I think are having a detrimental impact on people's health.
Yeah, especially over time. Bioaccumulation is a real thing. And so, with our toothpaste, we like to focus, and our salt, we like to focus on what's not in it rather than what's in it. And if you look at the ingredient label on a typical salt, maybe you go to your cupboard today, and not your cupboard, but somebody else's cupboard, they pull out a shaker, they look at the back of it, it's not unrealistic to have 6 or 8 ingredients in your salt. Now, salt is hygroscopic. Hygroscopic is a big word that means sucks water out of the air. So if I had a salt crystal here in my hand, and I lived in Florida on a humid day, that salt would start to sweat. It doesn't really sweat, it's actually sucking water out of the air. And if I sit there long enough, I'll have a pool of water in my hand underneath that salt crystal, because it works that well. And so because of that, if you have a granulated salt product that's nice and small crystals, when that attracts moisture, that moisture will then cause it to clump. And so over time, and if the salt is already naturally damp because it's coming from a current ocean or it's been processed into really unique crystals, it'll clump even worse. And so, years ago, salt manufacturers realized a couple of things. One, that there were other minerals with salt. In fact, the Great Salt Lake, this has sodium chloride in it, but it also has magnesium and potassium and calcium. And so mineral companies can take out the magnesium, turn it back into metal through electrolysis, and make a lot of money selling magnesium from a liquid salt source. Or you can take out the potassium chloride and sell the calcium chloride, and then you can still sell the salt as sodium chloride. And so by monetizing other parts of that process, it would be similar to an orange. So we have an orange, beautiful orange, and we know that orange has vitamin C in it. Well, if I were to take all the vitamin C out of the orange and then sell it to a vitamin company, and then I sell you the orange that's left over, it's not the orange that nature created. And salt companies can do that. They can take out potassium, magnesium, calcium, some of these other electrolytes that work to offset the sodium. And then another factor is, because salt is hygroscopic, it sucks water out of the air, by adding some antiperspirant type chemicals, some anti-moisture, anti-caking chemicals, the salt, which is designed to attract moisture, repels moisture. And if you look at the ingredient deck, you'll see things like yellow prussiated soda, sodium silicoaluminate. It's kind of similar to the antiperspirant aluminum chemical. You'll see things like propylene glycol 400, which is sounds a lot like antifreeze. It's a little bit different, but that's why propylene glycol sounds familiar. Propylene glycol 400 is an anti-caking agent. And so by adding these chemicals to the salt, they can make the salt, instead of attract moisture, which is what it does in nature, they can make the salt repel moisture. And that's why the old saying, when it rains, it pours. And the umbrella on salt is because when it's rainy and humid outside, the salt will still pour out of your shaker because you've added chemicals to it to repel moisture.
I never
That's where
knew
that originally came from.
How about that? I never knew that. That's very interesting.
And so, and these are and they're in small amounts, right? They're not huge amounts, but they're chemicals that are designed to repel moisture. And I wouldn't be 100% sure, but I would guess if you took 2 licks of an antiperspirant stick every morning, your body's going to react in some less than ideal way because of the way your body is designed to repel, moisture. Salt and water and oxygen are probably the 3 biggest, most important parts of your body. Outside of a spiritual discussion, we're water and salt. And that's really, water and minerals is really all that we are. We're like 42 pounds of mineral. I'm 150 pounds. And so if I'm about 72% water, I'm 42 pounds of mineral, and then I'm 108 pounds of water. And that's really what I am outside of a spiritual discussion. Mm-hmm. And so if you start taking chemicals in your body that interact with moisture or repel moisture or impact the minerals of our body and throw the minerals out of balance, those electrolytes out of balance, or throw the water out of balance, there's a whole lot of problems that start creeping in. And so a lot of people have heard that salt's bad for them, mm-hmm. but yet if you go back to if you go back to the hospital, even the first thing they're going to do is they're going to give you an IV of saline solution, which is salt water. Right. But it's not salt water that has propylene glycol. It's not salt water that has sodium silicoaluminate added. It's not salt water. It's just pure natural mineral, water and salt, which is what our bodies are made of. So anyway, I probably have gone on too long on that question, but
not at all.
And you can see, I love salt and I love talking about it. We could talk about salt and minerals for hours. Your listeners would probably be bored to tears, but the longer we talk about salt and minerals, the more excited I get.
Well, I think it's very important because salt is vital to human health. And that's one thing that most people, like myself until recently, never thought about really, about what's in the salt and what it actually does within the body. Like you talked about it being, back in the 70s, I think there was a commission on food recommendations. They had 6 that came out for people, and one of them was that low salt's the way to go, low fat's the way to go, high carb and low cholesterol, and I can't remember the other ones, but a lot of that has been proven wrong since then. Maybe not in the studies funded by the government, but by personal experimentation. People have found a lot of people low carb, keto, and even carnivore diets are becoming extremely popular, but for the way that they affect people's health. Are you seeing, especially in the keto, low-carb, carnivore world, a lot of people gravitating towards your products and your company?
Yeah, both in the keto side as well as in the complete opposite, in the vegetarian vegan side. And the reason for that is, because salt's essential for life. If we go back to every civilization was founded around access to the salt deposits because it was so essential for life. Animals need salt, humans need salt. We all need salt. So every civilization started with access to salt deposits. If you fast forward into the times of Rome, Roman soldiers were often paid a salary, or they were paid in salt. And the term, is a man worth his salt, or is a person worth their salt, was the idea that you're getting paid in salt. And if you're not working hard enough to earn the salt you're getting, then you weren't worth your salt. So that idea is, that's where that phrase comes from, is a man worth his salt, because you were paid in salt. If you go to any religious book, old religious books, they talk about salt being important, and if a salt has been destroyed, it's lost its savor. And they talk about how salt was used as a gift. It was used as a way to, if somebody bought a new home, they would bring salt over to help dispel, whatever. And so salt through time has always been this essential part of life. Trade routes were established around salt. Salt was used as salary, it was used as currency. It was so essential. And it was actually important for not only for health, but it was important for food preservation. And so if you don't have a refrigerator, you need salt to preserve your food, because it sucks moisture out of meat, or you can use it for kimchis and sauerkraut and pickles and fermented vegetables. And so if you go back to before the refrigerator, which was late 1700s, people would have eaten more salt, because everything they would have eaten outside of the summertime would have been preserved in some fashion in salt. Pickles, sauerkraut, kimchis, vegetables, fermented foods, all would have used salt as an important ingredient. And, jerkies and meat preservation, equally important. And so as people have moved away from processed foods that are heavy laden in processed salt, that's a big challenge with salty foods, is if the salty food was made with a natural balancing salt, it would be a lot different than that food that's made with all kinds of trans fats and chemicals, and then you throw a processed salt on top of that, you're just adding fuel to the fire. But if you go back to a natural diet and you be that keto, and so yes, the keto movement is really big on real salt for a lot of the reasons we've talked about, because oftentimes if somebody's craving sugar, what they're really craving is salt, and the body's just come to associate that with sugar. And so for a pre-workout or for an athlete, the salt is really essential. And then to break down food in the stomach, your body uses hydrochloric acid. So when somebody goes onto a low salt diet, one of the first things they experience generally is indigestion. Oftentimes if your body, you don't eat hydrochloric acid. Your body creates it by using the ingredients that you give it. And hydrochloric acid is HCl. So you have your hydrogen and your chloride. And so if you cut down on your chlorides and you're not getting those, your body has a much tougher time digesting the food that it needs, because it's using you're not drinking chlorine, and you're not, hydrogen is coming from water, but your body is making hydrochloric acid with the ingredients that you give it. And so if you're on a very, maybe if you've moved more toward the vegetarian vegan side, you're eating a lot of vegetables, well, you equally need, because you're not getting the sodium that's coming from the red meat, you can't eat enough celery to get enough salt to meet that need. Which is why when you go to the hospital, they don't give you celery to eat. They give you an IV of sodium chloride, because your body needs to balance. And in fact, if you're hooked up to an IV, you really can't overdose on sodium in an IV form. I mean, you might have 2 or 3 times the daily recommended allowance of sodium come through an IV, but if it's balanced with water and the other electrolytes that are usually there on the IV bags, you might need a catheter, but you're not going to overdose on sodium if it's in that 0.9% saline solution, because it balances the body. And so as someone is changing their diet, especially if they're moving from processed foods and they're going to go more natural, whatever that is, the keto or the complete, what was the other?
The carnivore?
Paleo, carnivore.
Yeah, paleo, carnivore.
Salt is essential, and you really can't get much more than caveman than using a natural mineral salt that was laid down long before the dinosaurs, or while the dinosaurs were here. So yes, the answer is, we are finding more and more people as they're changing their life, changing their diet, trying to make that lifestyle choice to get off some of the processed foods, get back to the way, your grandmother may have cooked, or go back to where our great grandmothers may have cooked, or should have cooked. We'll need to find a good quality salt for that. Salt adds flavor to foods. It also acts as a preservative. If you're making your own, preserved foods, kimchi, sauerkraut, maybe you're making some jerky or whatever, salt's essential for that. But then just adding flavor to life is what Redmond really does, because if you taste it side by side, it does taste substantially different, as opposed to a processed, demineralized, additive-rich salt.
That's a great point about, it's not just the keto, carnivore, paleo world, which that's where I associate with personally, but it's also people who are vegetarians or vegan. I think anybody who's getting away from the industrialized processed foods can definitely benefit from what you guys are offering. Now, where's the best place, Darryl, for people to find what you guys are offering?
Yeah, so for the real salt and for the human products, it's Redmond, Redmond. Redmond. There's 3 red mounds behind the town of Redmond. That's where the name comes from. There's town of Redmond. There's 3 red mounds. So it's Redmond, Redmond.life.
Okay.
So that is where they can find information about real salt. They can find information about the Redmond clay, which is great for facials, bee stings, poultices. Also find information about our toothpaste. We also have a new electrolyte supplement that we're doing with our real salt. We're adding some other electrolytes to it, as well as one with just the real salt. And so that'll be on that site. So that's a really good spot for the human side of the business. To learn more about the company philosophy and who we are and what we try to live up to, that would be Redmond Inc., redmondinc.com. And that has a more general page. That has links to all of the other subsidiaries, but it is a good spot to start.
Fantastic. And just on a personal note, you said you were working on that electrolyte solution type deal. I personally, we talked about this a little bit before we started, that I'd been sick for 30 odd years. I had tons of surgeries, tons of hospital stays. And so I dehydrate super fast. So I'm always drinking water. But the other side of it is the electrolyte side. And, I won't drink Gatorade because that stuff to me is poison. Personally, I think it is with all the stuff they put
Yeah.
into it. What is that electrolyte product, and do you have it available now?
Yeah, great question. So two things. So this one that we're reintroducing it. We had it for a while and then we put it on hold because we were just busy with other stuff. But that's actually a capsule. It's a veggie cap that has real salt in it, and then we have one that's going to have real salt with some other electrolytes in it. So that's a capsule to I mountain bike, I run, I ski, and so those easy to take while you're going. Now for an electrolyte drink, this is a free. You don't have to buy this one. So my kids are pretty active, lacrosse and track and soccer. I'm pretty active. I think the best electrolyte drink, and you might have your own recipe that you like to use, but what I suggest people do is take a quart of water, 1 quart, a quarter teaspoon of real salt, a squeeze of lemon, and if you're not opposed to it, then I'll put a little bit of honey in there. I know some people like honey, some people don't. But a quarter teaspoon of real salt, a squeeze of lemon, and a little bit of honey, I think is the best sport drink you'll ever find. It's super tasty. The lemon is refreshing. A little bit of honey gives you the energy burst. And then if you just drink lots and lots of water without the minerals, you're going to just flush more minerals out of your body.
Right.
And so by having that sports drink, make it yourself. You can do it for pennies, pennies per gallon. If that even, by putting a quarter teaspoon of real salt. It has the sodium. It also has small amounts of calcium, potassium, magnesium, over 60 minerals that occur naturally with the salt, with the lemon, a little bit of honey to taste. And that's my suggestion, or my free tip for the day, is make your own sports drink. And there's my recipe.
That's fantastic, and we'll make a little clip of that as well. So we'll put that online of just that part along with the rest of the conversation. A lot of great information today, Darryl. I really appreciate you sharing behind the scenes and the story of your company and about what you guys are doing to help empower individuals to live their best life, whether it's within your company or whether it's with your vendors and also with your customers. So I really appreciate your time today and all the information. And I appreciate everybody for listening today. And check out redmond.life and then redmondinc.com and realsalt.com. Check out their products and consider picking them up, because it's good to know not only where your food is grown, but also where your salt comes from. So thank you today, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks for having me.